Every summer, the breakneck pace of transfer business has me, you, and the rest of the footballing world gripped. You got Twitter handles with hundreds of thousands of followers dedicated solely to transfer gossip. Gossip being the operative word. And the media is guilty of that too, whether it's television, radio, or newspapers. But what goes on behind the scenes of a transfer deal? Who decides which players are targeted and why? Why do deals collapse? How long does a deal take? Well, we caught up with some of the leading figures instrumental in determining why a player moves from one club to another. Of course, information about player medicals remains highly confidential, but in this day and age, that's about the only kind of data that clubs can't get their hands on. They each use extensive player databases featuring every kind of statistic that you can imagine. Who decides in the club which players to target?
It's a good question. I think every club's different. I think you see in the media that in some clubs it's the football club that make those decisions against maybe sometimes the will of a manager. Sometimes in football clubs it seems to be the manager that comes in and has that power. In other clubs it's a growing role for a football director to make that probably in relation to the manager and the board as a collective response.
If a club asks for specific info on a transfer target, what type of thing typically are they looking for?
For each match that we could, we analysed 2,500 data points. That's direct data points, and from there's derived events that could number up to 6,000 pieces of information per game.
What would you say is the difference in terms of identifying a transfer target between now and say 10 years ago?
The mobility part was difficult. People didn't have scouting networks. They would have to pay large amounts of money to travel around the globe to go look at players. Maybe agents would send in a DVD, well not even a DVD then, maybe DVD, but VHS of the best bits of their players, and the information wasn't there, data wasn't there, and so having something in a central database is allowing you to analyse sort of 500,000 players. A club on its own 10 years ago might have been able to manage 50 players.
Where do you see this going in 10 years' time?
I think the data and the things that Prozone do, I think that is just a tool to help the process. I think money can be saved, I think due diligence can be better. I think all these things help a filtering process of which at the end of it, on the short list, the manager or the head coach will always have to ultimately go watch the player personally and make that end decision.
In 2013, FIFA's transfer matching system handled over 12,000 international player moves worth over $3.7 billion and up a massive 41% on 2012. Of course, some of those most heavily involved in those deals were the player agents. The mechanics of a deal, from initial interest to the deal being signed, typically how long does it take?
It can take months to hours. Let's say that you are a Premier League manager and you like a Premier League player. You'll know roughly what he's earning, you'll know roughly what he's going to cost, and you'll know that you want the player. So the only thing there to agree is the transfer fee and the personal terms. So it's very, very simple. But then when we come close to the window, the latest we started one was about 6:30 in the evening, and that got through before 11 o'clock.
How do you find out which clubs are looking for players and which players that they're looking for?
During the course of the season, we'll see, watch about 50 to 100 games, basically, either live or otherwise. And we'll also use statistical programs. We have, there are programs, for example, for agents and clubs, statistic-based, game-based as well. And we can see where they're having problems. If they're conceding 4 goals down the left-hand side in the past 5 games, they have a problem at left-back. And also we keep relationships with the managers, so we'll be speaking to them. And if we go and see the game and I don't rate a player, I'll ask the manager directly, what did you think of that player? What did you think of this player? What do you think of that performance? Were you not looking for anything else?
Your relationship as an agent with the club, who do you deal with the most? Is it a balance of the manager and the front office and the director of football?
Well, it depends entirely upon the club itself. There are some managers who I've got a close affinity to, who I've had relationships with in a footballing sense for the past 10, 15 years or so. And with these guys, you can have an open and frank conversation. They will tell you the inner workings of their club, what their issues are as well. And these are the guys who I will be frank and honest with. And I will tell them, for example, if a character or a player has a character trait that they need to be slightly aware of if they were thinking of going to him. But equally, you've got to look at the sustainability of a club. So for me locally, I'm based in London, I want to have relationships with the clubs in London. And if you look at the managerial turnover in most of these places, a lot of managers are lasting 8 to 18 months. So you can have the best relationship with a manager but if it's only going to last for sort of 12 to 18 months, it's not worth it.
How does the reputable agent handle the vagaries of tapping up a player?
I think that the reality is that it goes, you know, people will say any tapping up incident, it goes on all the time in football. Personally, I haven't had anybody ever sound out a player, you know, just find out if he's interested in joining us, because I simply wouldn't say to them, well, you know, I'd ask them, if it's my client, well, no. Do you want the player? Because then that's a very, very different kettle of fish. And in which case we can then go to the club where the player is at and talk about his situation.
Even if players, agents and clubs have negotiated their way to a happy place, there are other ways a deal can collapse.
And it's all about managing risk. So we need to give the people who are spending that money and giving the green light to go ahead with that sort of investment as much information as possible. So what risk is that player going to be to them? Has he had previous injury? We know that players who've had previous injury are going to have a higher risk of future injury, so we're going to look carefully into their history. We also know that players who are imbalanced, so certain muscle imbalances or certain weaknesses, are more likely to have future injury.
It's really about what the club and the manager want. So if the club and the manager wants a player who is completely fit with no risk at all, then that's going to be quite difficult, particularly once players get past a certain age. For instance, a club that hasn't got very much depth in their squad might not be able to afford to sign a player who's injured currently, even if it's clear that that injury is going to get better within 2 or 3 months' time, whereas a club that's got a little bit more time on their side might say, we'll take that player even though he's injured, because there's a very high chance that he'll be fine in a couple of months' time and he'll play for us then for the next 3 or 4 years without any problem.
There you go then. Let us know your thoughts, the best transfer deadline deals, right down there in the comments below. And if you haven't already, well, time to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Lots of reasons why. Of course, you can check out lots of other content we've got right there each and every day throughout the week. Our show, that is back next week, so we will see you then.